LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out, I think, 38 of the weekend's best clips for you tonight, and as usual, they come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, what I and many others call the corporate media here in the United States. Plus, I'll have about half a dozen of the usual political comedy clips from Friday night's Real Time with Bill Maher and a weekend update on last night's Saturday Night Live. I've organized the clips into the topics you can see listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to whatever topics most interest you. Topics tonight include more on Islam and the ongoing debate on whether violence by Islamic extremists should be blamed on Islam or extremism. Then several clips on the latest ISIS news, several on the government overthrown in Yemen, some more on America's endless wars in general, and a few clips on the controversy over the movie The American Sniper, a few more on the dust-up between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Obama administration, and then several at the end about the big Republican gathering in Iowa this week, sort of kicking off their 2016 presidential campaign, and there'll be a little bit discussion within those topics on the death of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. But first, one topic I do not want to cover that got a lot of coverage on all the shows is this controversy they call deflate-gate, about whether one of the NFL football teams that's going to the Super Bowl, the New England Patriots, cheated by deflating their footballs. But I will show you how Bill Maher made fun of the excessive coverage of the issue in his monologue on Friday that included this joke.
On CNN, you would have thought that Tom Brady caught Ebola, passed out at the controls of a Malaysian airliner, and crashed into Benghazi. Ay, ay, ay.
So I won't be covering that because, well, among other things, I'm not much of a sports fan, except a few years ago I was a basketball fan. Well, quite a few years ago I was a basketball fan when I was a fan of the Los Angeles Lakers in the era of Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I'm actually going to show a few clips of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on NBC's Meet the Press this morning talking about his religion of Islam in this next topic. But before I leave Bill Maher behind, I want to take a clip from his show on this topic of the nature of Islam and whether violence by Islamic extremists should be blamed on Islam or extremism. But this time I want to take a clip where I more agree with Bill Maher arguing against former Governor Howard Dean going too far in defense of Islam in a way, I guess, as I'll explain after I show you that clip over here.
To Muslims. And Howard, I know we disagree on this. You know, I heard you say that, ISIS is about as Islamic as I am.
Okay, so I'm thrilled you brought it up because the right wing jumped all over me after the usual suspects distorted what I said. Here's why I say that. Here's why I don't call ISIS Islamic terrorists. It empowers them to do it. What they are is a group of thugs who are murderous and subhuman. I mean, they do horrible things. They want us to call them Islamic terrorists because it connects them with 1 billion people. They are not.
But they are connected.
But they are Islamic terrorists.
And they are connected.
They are thugs and murderers. And,
Howard.
And for us to, we empower them.
Of course they are. And we're not saying all Muslims are thugs and murderers.
This has nothing to do.
But this idea that they are not connected to the religion. Tom Friedman wrote about this week. He said he had an article called Say It Like It Is. He said when you don't call things by their real names, you get in trouble. We've entered the theater of the absurd. It is not good for us or the Muslim world to pretend that this spreading jihadist violence isn't coming out of their faith community. Do you disagree with that?
This is not about political correctness. This is about depriving them of a propaganda victory which they seek. And for every time we use the word Islamic in conjunction with their behavior, we are making it easier for them to recruit, and that is a mistake.
But they are.
Well, that's
Now, Howard Dean had a little bit of a point there, but I wouldn't go so far as to not call Muslim terrorists Muslims at all, even while I do agree that you should call them out for their extremist take on a text that many others interpret much more peacefully. And I thought former star center of the Los Angeles Lakers, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, put it a lot better after he got kind of a laudatory introduction, but probably deservedly so, from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning over in this clip.
On to Tom Friedman earlier this week. And trophies on the court. He made headlines off the court. He was, of course, born Lou Alcindor. But in 1971, 3 years after converting to Islam, he publicly changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Many sports writers and fans misunderstood his motives, confusing them actually with Muhammad Ali's conversion to a more radical and confrontational group that called themselves the Nation of Islam. Over the past 40-plus years, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has established himself as a thoughtful and perceptive observer of the issues of race and religion in America, and he joins me now. In a recent column, this is what Mr. Jabbar wrote for Time. I look forward to the day when an act of terrorism by self-proclaimed Muslims will be universally dismissed as nothing more than a criminal attack of a thuggish political organization wearing an ill-fitting Muslim mask. Kareem, thanks for coming on Meet the Press.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be with you.
Well, let me start with that. How do we get there?
How we get there, I think information is the key here. Knowledge will enable everybody to understand what exactly we're dealing with. These people that claim to be Muslims and go about murdering people in horrific ways do not represent the teachings of Islam and have made it impossible for real Muslims to be understood, because everybody thinks that this political power grab that these people are involved in is what Islam is about, and it's not about that.
I thought that was kind of well put from that Time magazine quote from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar about wearing their Islam as an ill-fitting mask or whatever to hide their criminal thuggishness. That doesn't mean that they're not Muslims. They're also Christian terrorists. You know, when Christians shoot up abortion clinic or the KKK, I call them Christian, just like I would call extremist Muslims Muslim. But that doesn't mean that we have to have like a war on radical Islam. That's in this next clip I want to show. This is the White House Chief of Staff, Denis McDonough. He did the full Ginsburg, actually, which means comes from the lawyer for Monica Lewinsky way back in the Clinton years, going on all the Sunday morning shows, which is what White House Chief of Staff Denis McDonough did. And he's actually, some people could arguably say, one of the most powerful people in the executive branch, because he's the gatekeeper for the president. He kind of sets his agenda and who he gets to see, so he kind of decides what opinions the president gets to hear, and or at least to some extent. And anyway, here is Denis McDonough answering a similar question about radical Islam. This is also on NBC's Meet the Press this morning here.
On to Tom Friedman earlier this week. Here's what he wrote about the issue of calling it radical Islam that you're facing here. When you don't calling this war that's going on, that we're dealing with these terrorists. Here's what he writes: when you don't call things by their real name, you always get in trouble. And this administration, so fearful of being accused of Islamophobia, is refusing to make any leak to radical Islam from the recent explosions of violence against civilians, most of them Muslims, by Boko Haram in Nigeria, by the Taliban in Pakistan, by Al-Qaeda in Paris, by jihadists in Yemen, in Iraq. We've entered the theater of the absurd. So this criticism that the White House refuses to say the phrase radical Islam. Why?
Let's be clear that nobody denies that these are Muslims, and these are Muslims who claim that their warped view of their ideology is what informed their actions, their hateful ideology in this instance. What we simply do not believe, Chuck, is that they should somehow be seen as representatives of Islam. They are not. It's one of the world's great religions. It's the overwhelming majority of Muslims do not abide by this hateful ideology, and so we just ought not to give them any kind of belief that somehow they deserve that title.
So I also pretty much agree with that sentiment from the White House Chief of Staff Denis McDonough about, you know, calling them Muslims but not seeing them as real representatives of what Islam is about. And I want to show a couple more clips from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar over on NBC's Meet the Press. This is where Chuck Todd asked him about the rise of Islamophobia, which also, if by the way, if you look down in the video description, for those who didn't notice, I finally did do that edited, produced video on whether Sam Harris was defamed as Islamophobic by Glenn Greenwald and Reza Eslan, and so I actually got a lot of negative feedback from some fans of Sam Harris that apparently flocked to that video, and I even got a couple posts on my Facebook page saying that the word Islamophobia itself isn't a real word, and I don't know what's wrong with using that as the word for bigotry against Muslims, and that's a real thing, and it happens in the United States, it happens in Europe, it happens in a lot of places. And I like the way Kareem Abdul-Jabbar talked about why he thinks that people turn to Islamophobia rather than looking at the real causes of this kind of extremism over in this clip.
President Bush has said this. President Obama has said this. Yes. Plenty of political leaders have said this. You have spoken out on this issue a lot, and yet Islamophobia is on the rise in America, is it not?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. But if we give in to just, it feels good to just blame the religion and say that that's the cause of it. But the causes go a lot deeper, and most of them are beyond our means to change. There's going to have to be change in the countries where these people originate, where they have hope, where they have something to look forward to in their lives. Most of these people come from countries where there's no possible way for them to get ahead. People here in America can look forward to getting an education and a job. If you're raised in, say, Egypt or a poor country in the Middle East, you have no hope there. So the whole idea of progress, it's going to have to happen in those countries, and maybe some enlightenment will accompany that. But you know, you have countries over there where people are being executed for witchcraft. Now, this is the 21st century. Who believes in witchcraft? Right. But they're executing people for this. It shows you the mindset over there. It's not nothing that we understand.
You know,
And I definitely agree that the extremism from some Muslims is more a result of cultural and historical and economic and political factors, not a result of the actual text of the Quran and the religion of Islam itself, which so many other Muslims have found a way to interpret in a peaceful, even a liberal way. I know many liberal Muslims in the United States that I work with on a consistent basis. That's one of the reasons I feel so strongly that you can't say that Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas like Sam Harris did in the video that I finally made this week. And then the last clip I want to show from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he actually talks about the KKK. You know, I mentioned that I'm willing to call the KKK Christian, but that doesn't mean that I think the KKK is representative of Christianity, and that's a point that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar made in something he wrote, that Muslims shouldn't have to answer for their extremists any more than Christians should have to answer for what the KKK does. And in this clip, Chuck Todd plays something from Fox News' Bill O'Reilly kind of attacking what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had said, and gets Kareem's reaction in this clip.
You know, you wrote this, and you also wrote this. When the Ku Klux Klan burns a cross in a black family's yard, prominent Christians aren't required to explain how it isn't really a Christian act. Most people realize that the KKK doesn't represent Christian teachings. That's what I and other Muslims long for. Bill O'Reilly over at Fox News thoroughly, obviously, read your op-ed and had some responses to it. I want to play it and then get you to respond to him.
Okay.
But here's what Mr. Abdul-Jabbar is missing. Much of the Muslim world apparently does not understand the Islamic religion. Take Pakistan, for example. It allows the Taliban, major human rights violators, sanctuary. Is that permissible under Islam? Apparently, the government of Pakistan believes it is. Mr. Abdul-Jabbar's wish would come true a lot faster if all the Muslim nations would confront the jihad, the way the USA confronted the KKK. The FBI, largely comprised of Christians, wiped the Klan out, destroying its leadership by vigorously prosecuting the crimes they were committing.
What do you make of that?
Well, there is no one body that controls all Muslims.
Right.
A Muslim in Indonesia is under the control or influence of people there. It's not like you have a pope who supposedly is in charge of all Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
Even given that, the pope was not able to curtail the Irish Republican Army, who was doing terrorist acts in the name of Roman Catholics. You can't lump the two together and say that that works. It's a fit. It does not fit.
I guess his basic argument is, though, is that Muslims need to step up. It's not just non-Muslims, right? That Muslims need to step up and get rid of this radical strain, do they not?
Anybody who respects the rule of law and justice is outraged by these deeds. It doesn't matter what their religious affiliation is. Anybody with any common sense and any sense of decency understands that these are horrific acts and they have no place in any religious beliefs.
Why do you think?
And obviously, if you're going to have a fight between Lakers star Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Fox News' Bill O'Reilly, I'm most likely going to side with Kareem, I guess. And I think the point he's making does make sense. I know some of my viewers don't agree, but others do. And so I thought I would play those clips for you. And then one last clip I want to play for you, sort of on this topic. This is from CNN's State of the Union. The host this week, Candy Crowley's been gone for several weeks now. The guest host was Michael Smerconish, and I think he did a fairly good job. And this is a question that he asked to Adam Schiff, a Democratic congressman, about he started off asking about our relationship with Saudi Arabia with the death of the King Abdullah. And first I thought that Adam Schiff was not really hard enough on Saudi Arabia. That's one of the things, I guess, where I'm moving a little more towards Sam Harris and Bill Maher, that showing a Democrat here who is definitely not hard enough on Saudi Arabia. First blames, Muslim extremism on Iranian influence, which is justifiable for the Shiite extremism, but then blames Sunni extremism on ISIS without talking about Wahhabism coming straight out of Saudi Arabia, and then says like Saudi Arabia is some sort of leader of the Sunnis without even recognizing the part they played in Sunni extremism. And that's over in this clip.
I'll know the president cutting short his visit to India so that he can pay respects in Saudi Arabia. I get the impression that that is more than I happen to be in the neighborhood. Speak to the relationship with the Saudis, please, and its importance.
Well, it's a key relationship, and I'm glad the president is making the trip. I think it's a very good call. Saudi Arabia is in a period of transition in its leadership. Happily, it looks like that the new leadership will carry on many of the policies, the close relationship with the United States that we would like to see, and I think that's very positive. In particular, the Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Nayef is very Western educated, close to the United States, very strong in counterterrorism efforts. So I think there'll be a continuity in the relationship that's important at a time when Saudi Arabia is under enormous strain, with Iran reaching a greater influence in places like Yemen through the Houthis, and places like Damascus, in Iraq as well. So Saudi Arabia feels very beleaguered at the moment. It's an extraordinarily important relationship for the United States. And these personal matters, like the president's trip, really have an impact. So this is an important relationship. And one last point I would make on that is Saudi Arabia is going to be critical in not only cutting off some of the financing to groups like ISIL, but also in attacking the ideological struggle going on, condemning the perversion of Islam that we see in ISIL. Saudi Arabia is one of the leading authorities in terms of Islam, as well as the Sunni leadership in the region, and so they're going to play a vital role.
And finally,
yeah, the unfortunate part is they've already played a vital role in spreading extremist Islam, the Wahhabi Sunni version, just like Iran has played a role in spreading the extremist Shiite version. And that's really where the the conflict in the Middle East should be, if we were to get things going in the right direction, it should be a conflict between moderates on our side and extremists on both Shiite extremists and Sunni extremists. But of course, that's not really what's going on in the Middle East, it doesn't look like. And I want to spend several clips now talking about ISIS, the Islamic State, or in Iraq and Syria. Now they just call themselves the Islamic State. And they made news again, supposedly beheading this Japanese hostage, and then they still hold another Japanese hostage. And first I'm going to show a couple general news reports on that. First from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They had their reporter Brian Ross give an update on the ISIS situation with the Japanese hostage over in this clip.
While the hostage being threatened is Japanese, the U.S. is very much involved in efforts to locate or free him, in part because of the close relationship with Japan, but also because at least one of the other hostages is a 26-year-old American woman.
For now, all efforts are focused on the Japanese television journalist, Kenji Goto. In the latest ISIS video, he was forced to hold a photo of what appears to be his beheaded cellmate, and then read a plea for his own life, asking for a prisoner swap instead of the original $200 million ransom demand.
They are being fair. They no longer want money. So you don't need to worry about funding terrorists.
In Japan, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called the video an outrageous and unforgivable act. And Goto's mother said her son sounded extremely nervous, and she added, "This is no time to be optimistic." The Japanese hostage video was substantially different than previous such videos, without the usual high production techniques and ISIS insignias, and no appearance of the masked executioner known as Jihadi John. But today, U.S. officials are using the video to look for clues that might help locate the hostages.
Any information that they can glean about where the perpetrators are, the terrorists are, they're working to find that information now.
The prisoner ISIS is demanding be freed, Sajida Rishawi, is a failed suicide bomber on death row in Jordan, who Islamist groups have tried and failed several times before to free. She was part of an attack on a Jordanian hotel 10 years ago that killed at least 60 people attending a wedding. Jordanian King Abdullah has repeatedly refused to exchange her for other prisoners, although he has put her execution on hold.
So yeah, that was the report from ABC's Brian Ross. And then I want to show another quick report kind of updating, or CNN State of the Union tends to have the, because it's the last show taped, or recorded, I should say. They probably don't use tape. It has the latest news usually. Although I think since Candy Crowley left, the 9 a.m. Pacific show is just a recorded repeat of the 6 a.m. Pacific show, at least the last couple weeks. So maybe it isn't as updated. But anyway, here is Michael Smerconish, the guest host, talking to their reporter Will Ripley about this same issue, the Japanese hostage and the prisoner in Jordan that may be swapped, or someone wants to swap, over in this clip.
Sajda al-Rishawi, who failed to detonate her bomb in a 2005 attack on a series of hotels in Jordan that killed about 60 people. She's a very high-value prisoner for the Jordanian government. So here in Tokyo, while Prime Minister Abe is saying that they are in discussions with the Jordanian government, he had a phone call with the King of Jordan yesterday. He stopped short of saying whether there are any serious discussions about the release of a convicted terrorist in exchange for a single Japanese journalist, Kenji Goto. Goto's mother, who recognized his voice on that video that was uploaded yesterday, says that she's very fearful for her son's life. She could see in his face that he knows there could be some very, very difficult and devastating things to come if ISIS's demands are not met, Michael.
Will Ripley.
So yeah, that was the latest update on the possible swap between Jordan and ISIS and Japan. I don't know how that three-way swap works, but in terms of the United States being involved, Michael Smerconish was one of the people who got to question White House Chief of Staff Denis McDonough. As I mentioned, he did the full Ginsburg, going on all 5 shows, and in this question, this is right at the beginning of the interview, you'll see Michael Smerconish actually references the whole full Ginsburg thing, and then asks him if the United States will negotiate with terrorists, and the answer apparently is no, although it made me think of that hostage swap for Bo Bergdahl with the Taliban in Afghanistan, or wherever Bo Bergdahl turned out to be. But apparently we don't negotiate with hostage takers or terrorists. That's what the White House Chief of Staff says over in, let me make sure I get the right one, clip number 10? Yeah, clip number 10 here.
Thank you. Denis McDonough, nice to have you here. You're pulling the full Ginsburg today. I appreciate your time.
I guess so, yeah. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Should that exchange be made? Should that kind of a swap be entertained with terrorists?
You know our policy on that, Michael. We don't either negotiate or make exchanges or pay ransoms. We think that results in just more cash floating around with these very hateful characters who will just have more ability to ply their trade.
Should family members be permitted to entertain their own negotiations with hostage takers?
I just want to be clear here that we're in very close touch with the families. They understand the strength of the president's feeling on this. And obviously, the president understands the strength of their devastation as some of this has transpired over the course of the last several months. So we'll continue to remain in close coordination with and consultation with the families.
You know that there have been some criticism.
So, yeah, I guess according to White House Chief of Staff Denis McDonough, we don't negotiate in these situations. But I guess for prisoners of war, it may be a little bit different. Maybe that's the difference between this and the Bo Bergdahl situation. I want to show a couple clips on this issue also from NBC's Meet the Press. First, their reporter Richard Engel had this interesting interview. I'm not going to show all of it. I'm going to show a short clip of it. This guy, Ahmed Rashidi, who apparently went from Turkey over into Syria to look for these twin sisters that were being married off within the Islamic State to some ISIS officials or something, and he got captured and was held prisoner by them, and then gained their trust and learned a lot about them. He was basically living with ISIS for a month, and he describes it in detail. And like I said, there's a link down in the video description. You can see the entire episode of Meet the Press, but here's a short clip of that interview between Richard Engel and this guy, Ahmed Rashidi, who says some scary things about ISIS over here.
What did you learn? The connection between Europe and Syria was like, they connect every day. They speak phone every day.
Did the ISIS fighters seem worried by the U.S. bombing campaign?
No, I was happy about it.
Because he says being attacked by the U.S. meant that they were now just as important as that old American enemy, Al-Qaeda.
They want to be better than Al-Qaeda, Islamic State. This is why they need to do something more brutal than the World Trade Center.
When you saw the attacks in Paris, what did you think?
I was angry, but it didn't surprise me at all.
You think there'll be more?
Yes, because when Islamic State attacked, they will be big. It will be very, very big.
Much bigger than Paris.
Yes.
So yeah, that was, I don't know how accurate what that guy was saying. They said that at the beginning of that report that they had verified some of the details of his story, so he's not completely making it up. I don't, at one point they asked him if he'd been tortured, and he didn't give any details about that because it was too personal. And then he talked about maybe he had to torture other people in order to gain their trust, and it's this long, involved story. But that part about ISIS actually welcoming the bombing from the United States because it raises their profile and makes them more like the Al-Qaeda that they're competing against. That was a question that Chuck Todd then asked to White House Chief of Staff Denis McDonough, and I'll talk about it a little more after you see his answer to that question here.
Thanks a lot, Chuck. You saw Richard's story there with this former, I guess, ISIS both captive and fighter, and the way he escaped. I wanted to pick on something he said about how the Islamic State embraces the U.S. attacks because what they want is supremacy over Al-Qaeda. When you hear something like that, and I know this isn't news, I mean, to you, this has been this competition. How does that impact strategy?
Well, this is one of the things that we thought about going back to the early days of this campaign. We know that there is an unbelievably important fight going on inside of Sunni Islam. We think that the resolution of this fight is going to be resolved by Arab and Muslim fighters on the ground. That's why it's been so important to us, and that's why the president has directed that our strategy be in support of fighters on the ground, Iraqis and Syrians, so that they win this fight for themselves, for their own future. That's how it's going to be won. You saw exactly the mindset we're dealing with, Chuck, with this organization. That's why we're conducting the strategy the way we're conducting it.
So, I don't know if you think that that's a good answer or not, but I want to show you one more clip on this issue of ISIS, and this is sort of a transitional clip because it goes to the next topic, which is what happened in Yemen, the overthrow of the government in Yemen by the Houthis. Some people say Houthis, some people say Houthis. I don't know. Houthis reminds me too much of, like, maybe this is what Houthi did after the breakup of Houthi and the Blowfish, so maybe I'll just call them the Houthis so I don't get confused. This is the Fox News report on what's been going on both with ISIS and with Yemen, and compare this to the reports I showed from ABC and CNN at the beginning. In this one you'll see it's all spun in such a way as to criticize President Obama in the most possible way that he can be criticized. You'll see the first couple parts of this is Fox News reporter Ed Henry at the beginning of Fox News Sunday this morning, talking about how what's happening is showing up all these contradictions from the Obama administration. That's how the whole thing is framed over in this clip.
Joins us with the latest. Ed. Well, Chris, here in India, the president has now phoned the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to express solidarity over this beheading. He also called it a brutal murder. That comes just a few days after, in his State of the Union, the president claimed that American leadership is stopping ISIS's advance. At a news conference here, he was also pressed about another contradiction, the fact that he called Yemen a success story in September, while now it's clearly in shambles. The president denied U.S. counter-terror efforts there have been sidelined, though his defensiveness shows that the ISIS beheading is just one of a series of crises in the Mideast. In fact, on Air Force One on his way here, the president also called the new king, King Salman of Saudi Arabia, and abruptly canceled plans for Vice President Biden to lead the U.S. delegation mourning the death of King Abdullah. Images like this of the French President Hollande personally greeting King Salman was perhaps too much for the president. Remember, he was slammed not too long ago for not personally going to that anti-terror rally in Paris. And look at how Saudi Arabia, which the president is visiting Tuesday, sits right in the middle of this cauldron. Yemen on its border of the south, up in the north there, Iraq and Syria, where ISIS has strongholds. And just across the Persian Gulf, of course, to the east, you have Iran inching closer to nuclear weapons. That's why a few days ago, when the president did these interviews with some YouTube stars, he at one point said of the world, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. Clearly an understatement, Chris. Ed Henry.
I don't know how Ed Henry could have spun that more negatively for President Obama, especially they even added in that thing about the interview with the YouTube stars, which they've been like beating like a dead horse over on Fox News about how inappropriate and how it like brought down the level of the presidency. I saw Howard Kurtz, who used to do CNN's Reliable Sources, and I always thought he was kind of iffy in terms of being objective when he was looking at media bias for CNN, and now of course he's gone over to Fox News and his true colors have shown, I guess. But I thought that was not that anything in the facts there were really that far off, but it was like spun to criticize President Obama in the maximum way possible, I guess. Although President Obama did say some things about Yemen just back last September about how it was a model for U.S. policy that I'll show over on Fox News Sunday. They asked Denis McDonough about, and that'll be in a few more clips. But first I want to show Denis McDonough over on CBS's Face the Nation, where Bob Schieffer tried to get him to admit that the United States was surprised by this overthrow from the overthrow of the government of Yemen, and Denis McDonough would not admit that over in this clip.
That. But the government fell. I mean, the strategy obviously didn't work, at least I mean, was this a surprise to U.S. officials? I don't remember any talk about this in the State of the Union message.
Oh, boy, we've been talking about Yemen for a long time, Bob. Going back to the earliest days of the administration, we were very focused on the counterterrorism efforts there because of the brutality and the nefariousness of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, an offshoot of al-Qaeda Central. Now, we've been very clear that we have a counterterrorism strategy, Bob. That's what we're trying to do, is to make sure that we keep them off kilter. That's why we did things like we did, and it's been acknowledged about Anwar al-Awlaki, for example. That's point one. Well, point two, you keep bringing it back to the government. I think it's very important to recognize that governance in Yemen has always been difficult. We will continue to press actors on the ground, including today, to make decisions transparently, pursuant to a political agreement, so that we can work with them to keep on the offensive against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But we can't be responsible for every government in the region. We have to make sure that they're doing that themselves.
I take your point on that, but were we surprised that this government collapsed?
We weren't surprised that this government collapsed. We knew that this was an ongoing challenge over the course of the last several months. That's why we've been pressing on all the actors to take important steps to address the situation. We're continuing to do that today.
Now, I'm not really convinced that just because they talked about Yemen a lot, that they weren't surprised by this overthrow of the government. And like I said, on Fox News Sunday, they also had Denis McDonough on, and they played this clip from President Obama last September using Yemen as a model of their counterterrorism strategy. And I will talk about that a little more after I show you that clip. Let me make sure I get the right clip here. That is clip number 15 over.
Just 4 months ago, the president was bragging about his policy in Yemen. Take a look.
This strategy of taking out terrorists who threaten us while supporting partners on the front lines is one that we have successfully pursued in Yemen and Somalia for years.
But now, Yemen's government has collapsed. There are reports that the U.S. has had to suspend some of our counterterrorism efforts against al-Qaeda in Yemen, AQAP. How much is the chaos in Yemen going to hurt our effort to fight, perhaps the greatest terror threat we face?
Going back to 2007, Chris, the president has been very clear that his administration will be about taking the fight to al-Qaeda and its affiliates where they are, based on our terms, and ensuring that we do not face the kind of threat that we faced in 2001. That's exactly what we're doing. What the president said just there on the TV is that he just said that what we're doing in Yemen is not occupying Yemen with a large ground force. What we're doing is training Yemenis to take the fight to AQAP, making sure that we have the wherewithal, intelligence and wherewithal to take out threats when they are presented to us, when they threaten our people and our interests. That, by the way, Chris, is exactly what we've done in Yemen, and we will continue to do that.
But to repeat my question, the fact is that the intelligence agencies that you have dealt with in going after AQAP, the defense agencies you've dealt with, they are no longer under any control. It's in chaos. Isn't that going to hurt our effort against al-Qaeda in Yemen?
This is what we know about al-Qaeda, be it in Syria, be it in Iraq, be it in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or on the Arabian Peninsula. They're going to go into the dark corners where it's difficult for us to get to them. That means that we're always going to be dealing with difficult political situations. We're going to have to be dealing with partners who are less than perfect. That's why we're going to work with them, train them, because this is as much their fight as it is our fight. And when we need to, Chris, we'll take action to protect ourselves. You've seen this president do that time and again, and we'll do it when we need to.
Let's turn.
Now, you see there that White House Chief of Staff Denis McDonough talked about taking action when we need to for our national security, and also going into the dark corners. That he was on, like I said, he did the full Ginsburg, and he used that phrase, going into the dark corners or the dark places, which, I don't know, maybe that is a reference to drone strikes. I notice I've been reading your comments along the way. I saw this comment down in the comment section from N08549, wondering if they will address big reason why Yemen president overthrown, he allowed American drone strikes. And no, although Denis McDonough was on all 5 shows and mentioned, going into the dark corners on all 5 of them, no one questioned him about whether the drone strikes, they all question him on whether this overthrow of the government in Yemen would in some way stop our counterterrorism efforts, but no one asked about whether our counterterrorism efforts were in any way responsible for the overthrow. That actually never came up. And I actually want to show another clip of Denis McDonough using that whole dark corners phrasing. This is over talking to George Stephanopoulos over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos himself was interviewing Denis McDonough and asked him if this unrest and the overthrow of the government in Yemen, if it was going to help Al-Qaeda, because the Houthis, or the Houthis, who have now taken over the government of Yemen, they're Shiites aligned with Iran, but the big Al-Qaeda threat in Yemen is Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. That's like their home base. And so George Stephanopoulos is asking Denis McDonough if this is going to help Al-Qaeda, because now we don't have a government allied with us to fight Al-Qaeda in Yemen. And he gets the dark corners answer again over in this clip.
Also said that those operations against Al-Qaeda in Yemen, such a dangerous group, not suspended. But the Washington Post reported this week several senior administration officials saying they have been suspended. We've lost intelligence. And one said the chaos has aided Al-Qaeda. There's no question in our mind that Al-Qaeda has gotten a breather. Hasn't all this unrest helped Al-Qaeda in Yemen?
Well, you heard the president say this morning in his press conference that, in fact, Al-Qaeda, hides in dark corners and tries to make sure that they're operating in places where they're not going to be pursued. That means that a lot of the places that they spring up and where they try to operate are places like Yemen or Somalia or North Africa, where the security forces are underdeveloped, where the political situation is volatile. And that's why we have put in place a strategy that is designed to make sure that we are not only strengthening our partner security forces for them to take the fight to Al-Qaeda,
but we don't have a partner now, do we?
Forward lean, George. We're also on the forward lean to make sure that if we see something that is presenting a threat to us, we will not be afraid to act. In fact, you've seen this president do that time and again.
But will the...
So that was pretty much the same answer you saw to the different question. And like I said, Denis McDonough gave that same basic answer on all 5 shows, the dark corners answer. I don't need to show you more than 2 versions. Maybe 2 versions was one too many, but I want to show you one more clip on Yemen. This was an interesting analysis back on CNN State of the Union. Michael McConough talking again to Democratic Congressperson Adam Schiff. And I don't know about Michael McConaughey's question. It's basically whether Yemen today is like Afghanistan in 2001, but Adam Schiff's answer, comparing it to Iraq, I think is a little more prescient, especially in terms of the way the takeover of extremist Shiites aligned with Iran might drive the Sunni population into the arms of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Over in this clip.
Congressman Schiff, in your capacity as a member of the Intel Committee, allow me to ask a question about Yemen. It seems as if Yemen is the Afghanistan of pre-September 11. In other words, this now is ground zero for the terrorist activity. What is it about Yemen? What was it about Afghanistan? I ask that question so that we can anticipate what will become the next breeding ground for Al-Qaeda and ISIL.
Well, Afghanistan is a very good abject lesson for us. Many people are urging us to move in a more full-throated way into Yemen. We've seen after a massive occupation, a very long occupation of Afghanistan, that a large American troop presence on the ground is not necessarily the answer. So I think there is a natural and understandable resistance to jumping too hard, too fast. And for that reason, I think a lot of the criticism of the president is wrong-headed. At the same time, there is a very real risk here if the Houthis try to run this country, that you could see a dynamic take place, much like we saw in Iraq, where if the Sunni tribes in Yemen feel that they're being ruled by a Shia clan with the support of Iran, they're going to be thrown into the arms of AQAP. And this will be an opportunity, undoubtedly, for Al-Qaeda to exploit. And so there are certainly some lessons to be considered in Afghanistan, but there are also some very very vibrant warning signs about the course of action in Iraq recently that we need to pay attention to in Yemen.
So, yeah, I think that is kind of interesting analysis that the takeover of the Shiite extremists in the government of Yemen may drive the Sunni population into the arms of the extremists Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, one of the most dangerous Al-Qaeda groups left now that core Al-Qaeda from the Afghanistan-Pakistan area has been, a lot of it's been eliminated. But I wanted to get to the topic of the more general sort of, I guess they call it, some people call it the endless war that America's been fighting. And it even brings in a little bit about the Ukraine and Syria. And but before I get to that, like I said, I've been reading your comments along the way, and I noticed someone who I tried to go through my Sam Harris video and respond to as many of the critical comments as I could. And then I had to do some other stuff. I haven't really been able to do that for the last 24 hours, but I'm planning on going back and answering at least another 10 or 20 critical comments. There are so many that I have read them all, and I have responses, and the ones I have time to post, I will post. And someone who I argued with, I noticed has been posting a lot of comments down in the comment section there, Derek Neal. This is one comment I had time to grab. Derek Neal asked, do you take issue with radical Christians in the U.S. being called Christian fundamentalists rather than just blaming their views on fundamentalism? Well, it's not really a question of the semantics, like whether to call them Christians or not, or Muslims or not. I said I'm perfectly willing to call Muslim extremists Muslims and Christian extremists Christians, but no, I don't. When there are Christian extremists, I don't blame their extremism on the fact that they are Christians, because there are so many people who are Christians who don't take that route, and that's the whole point. And I made this point way back, I think in a video I made in 2006, at the time they executed, was it 2006 or 2007, when they executed Saddam Hussein in Iraq after they found him hiding in the spider hole. And I made this video called, I think it was called Saddam Hussein Shows Worst of Judeo-Christian Islamic Tradition. And the argument I made in that video is that I find that people often bring to religion the values that they came with. And so if you're because all those Abrahamic religions have some nasty militaristic violent parts in their texts, and also some good peaceful humanistic parts in their texts. And you get to decide. It's not like some people say that you have to ignore the violent stuff in order. Well, the texts are contradictory. It's not like there's some really. If you've ever read the Quran or the Christian Bible or the Jewish Bible, you'll find that they are not a uniform, understandable way of living. There are all these contradictions. Even if you say that you believe every word in there, you're making a lot of choices. So people have to bring in their own values or make value judgments about what's in there, because it's basically impossible not to find conflicts in those texts between humanistic values and militaristic values, I believe. Anyway, so I wanted to answer that comment before I go on to this question of the endless war. And I noticed Bill Maher over on HBO's Real Time had on the author of this Atlantic piece that came up a couple weeks ago on my Sunday Clip Roundup. I had on this retired general talking about how America had lost the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it was this whole segment on endless war, and they referenced this article in the Atlantic by James Fallows about why America has the best military but keeps losing. And James Fallows himself was over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, and Bill asked him about his analysis and his willingness to say we lost these wars and what it's cost the United States. And I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip here.
And you're also not afraid to say that the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq we lost. And you'll never hear a president say that. Of course, Obama starts every speech, as every president does, State of the Union is strong. You make the point, no, by any real measure, we lost those wars.
Right, and there are battles we won all the way along. But if you look, anybody who writes the history of this era will say the biggest strategic mistake we made was invading Iraq, without provocation a dozen years ago. And this has been a decade plus of strategic defeat for the United States. I think in the piece I used the line that the trillions of dollars we spent on these wars, 2 or 3 trillion, nobody really knows, might as well have been burned for the good they've done for the United States, for the world.
Right, and you also make the point that the only real strategic victory was killing bin Laden.
Right, which we could have done years earlier. I mean, it's good that it happened at all, but one of the many things that went wrong with the war in Iraq was the diversion of the effort to rout bin Laden and his troops from Tora Bora, and so that was when he was on the run early. It took another decade to get him.
Right. I mean, if I've asked this at panels before, if we had only reinforced the cockpit doors on airplanes and killed bin Laden and not done all the other stuff, wouldn't we be in better shape now?
We sure would, and I think people would have this kind of discussion. It would be debated in presidential campaigns, as it hardly is at all. It would be a subject of common knowledge if the public at large was connected somehow to the military. If you take everybody who's fought in all the wars of the last dozen years, at any time, it's 0.75% of the population. There are twice as many farm families as there are people in the military now.
I mean, the ironic thing is that when people say, well, we should never cut the military, of course, there are people who never look into how much we spend on the military, what that money is going towards. Really, spending that much makes us weaker because we don't have money to spend on building our nation at home. We don't have the infrastructure of other countries. We don't have a lot of things other countries have because we waste 20% of our budget on basically fighting Russia in 1978.
Oh, it's true, and the aircraft.
We have, what, 10 aircraft carriers?
We have more aircraft carriers than anybody else. The Chinese have one. They bought a used one from Ukraine. That's going to be a long time before that's a threat.
And it actually should be fighting the Soviet Union in 1978, just not just Russia, but I thought that was kind of funny at the end there. And a lot of what James Fallows said obviously is true. And I want to show a couple clips now of Denis McDonough sort of addressing the same issue, though not really as poignantly, I guess, as the way James Fallows put it talking to Bill Maher. But this is over on NBC's Meet the Press. Chuck Todd asked Denis McDonough just generally, why are we more in chaos than we were 15 years ago? I guess that's before 9/11, or because 9/11 was 2001. So I guess why has there been so much chaos in the last 15 years? And that was actually a question asked on a couple different shows. And I chose to take the clip from NBC's Meet the Press this morning in this clip.
Why does this feel more chaotic now than it did 15 years ago?
I'm not sure what you were feeling 15 years ago, Chuck.
No, fair enough, but it is sort of, I think people are watching this and are going, geez, everything's on fire.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
It does feel like that, and that's why it's very important that we react not to the emotion, but the facts and the developments as we see them. That's why we lay out a comprehensive strategy that says the challenge for us is not to resolve every problem for these countries and for their politicians. The challenge for us is to ensure that there are not threats like the threat from Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan in 2001 that materialize here on our shores. That's why we're very diligent about the intelligence, we're very diligent about the cooperation with our partners, and we're very diligent about the fact, Chuck, sometimes when I come on these shows, I get criticized from the other side that we're too aggressive. Yeah. So the point is, when we see threats to the United States interests and the United States people and to the United States, we're going to take them out.
I want you to respond to
And then the additional clip I want to play from Denis McDonough after showing that sort of explanation of why the world is in chaos. And I'm not showing another clip from one of the other shows where he actually kind of blamed it on social media, saying we see more of the chaos than we used to. But here he is over on CBS's Face the Nation, where Bob Schieffer asked him, are you really downplaying things to make it look like you're winning? And you can see how Denis McDonough responds to that question here.
You know what your critics say? They say that you're downplaying these incidents because they don't conform to the narrative you would like to construct here, and that is that we're winning this war on terrorism, which you don't even call a war anymore.
Well, we say we're in a war against al-Qaeda. We just never said we've been in a war against terrorism, which is a tactic. It's an unusual thing to say that we're at war against a tactic. We are, however, at war against al-Qaeda. Its manifestations in Yemen, its manifestations in South Asia, its manifestations in East Africa, North Africa, and we're at war bound to ultimately destroy, first defeat, then destroy ISIL in Iraq and Syria. So, Bob, we're not downplaying anything. We're investing an enormous amount of time and resources, including an enormous amount of resources that the American people make available to us, and an enormous amount of our troops in this effort. So we'll continue to do that.
What about this?
Now, I got to give White House Chief of Staff Denis McDonough points there for saying we're not in a war on terror, because that would be a war on a tactic, and that doesn't really make much sense. That's pretty obvious. I don't know why all reasonable people didn't come to that conclusion way back in the Bush administration, but there seem to be many people, especially on Fox News, who are very adamant that we have to call it a war on terror or a war on terrorism. But I also want to show on CBS's Face the Nation, they had both a Republican senator and a Democratic senator pretty much disagreeing with the White House and wanting to be more hawkish. It's, of course, Senator John McCain, and then Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein from my state of California, but she is often kind of right-wing on these kinds of things. But first, here's John McCain coming after Denis McDonough, I think, saying that he has lost touch with reality or some such thing over in this clip.
Senator McCain, you had a chance to listen to Mr. McDonough. What is your reaction to what you just heard him say?
I'm afraid that he and the president have lost touch with reality. Iran is on the march throughout. In Yemen, it's not AQAP that's taken over the government, it's the Houthis, who, guess what, are backed and supported by the Iranians. The Iranians are now either dominant or extremely influential in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen. They're on the move in Bahrain, and they are winning. And there is no, I did not hear Mr. McDonough articulate a strategy except that we will fight against these people, well, which is nice to know. But when you look at the map, the Iranians are on the march, AQAP, and the ISIS in both Iraq and Syria are doing quite well. There is no strategy to defeat them. For example, in Kobani, we have been bombing Kobani for months with the U.S. air power, and they're still there. ISIS continues to consolidate their position and attract thousands of young people from all over the world. And believe me, I agree with the director of British intelligence, MI5, who gave a speech last week saying that these young people, mainly from other countries that are now in Iraq and Syria, are a direct threat to the United States of America and Great Britain. So there is no strategy. It is delusional for them to think that what they're doing is succeeding. And we need more boots on the ground. I know that's a tough thing to say and a tough thing for Americans to swallow, but it doesn't mean the 82nd Airborne. It means forward air controllers, it means special forces, it means intelligence, and it means other capabilities. And for them to say we expect them to do it on their own, they're not doing it on their own, and they're losing.
Well,
so yeah, I know that was kind of a long clip. It started off with loss of reality and went all the way through delusional, but I wanted to let you see the part where he was also saying more boots on the ground. I wasn't sure exactly what level of combat operations he wanted there, but you know, we already have a lot of boots on the ground anyway. A forward air controller, I guess we have advisors, but we probably have special forces in there too. They just don't advertise that. But having shown John McCain calling the Obama administration delusional and not in touch with reality, with this idea of having the local people fight the battles rather than the American military coming in, which is, as we saw in that clip a while back regarding ISIS, that's what ISIS actually wants. They want the U.S. forces to come in so they can have a battle on their home territory with actual U.S. soldiers. You know, they already get higher reputation, they think, and you know, compared to Al-Qaeda just by getting bombed by U.S. bombers. So I want to show, this is Dianne Feinstein claiming that she agrees both with the White House Chief of Staff, Denis McDonough, and with Senator John McCain. But if you watch the whole interview, and I'm only going to show you about 2 minutes of Dianne Feinstein, because I guess that's all I can stand, but there's a link down in the video description to the entire CBS Face the Nation, and they probably have the Dianne Feinstein interview separately if you really want to see it. It turns out she really agrees a lot more with John McCain, and I think that's also evident just in the first 2 minutes of her answer over here.
Majority. Well, Senator, you heard Senator McCain, you heard Denis McDonough. Where do you come down on all this?
Oh, wow. You know, I agree with some of the things that Senator McCain said and Mr. McDonough as well. Let me tell you where I come down on it. I think our intelligence with respect to what's going to happen in many of these countries is weak. Whether it's because we do not have adequate human intelligence or not, I don't know. But we've seen, McCain is right, we've seen this happen a number of times. We certainly saw it with the Ukraine and the taking of the Crimea, and now what happened with the Houthis. And
in Yemen.
In Yemen, right. And with respect there, no one knows what's going to happen. The future is unknown, which really should not be the case. We know that the Houthis have said they would leave us alone, and yet their slogan is death to America, death to Israel. They have deposed the president. The military has separated off. We have less than 300 Yemeni military guarding our embassy. So I think there are a number of priorities there. One is to see that our people are safe. The second is to take a good look at our policy with respect to Yemen. And it's largely counterterrorism. It's largely developed against al-Qaeda, because al-Qaeda is coming after us. They've tried to get 4 of these bombs that go through magnetometers into our country. So it's targeting the leadership and trying to take that leadership out. Now that's what comes through to people. My concern is, where is Iran going? Iran has been supporting the Houthis. Is Iran trying to begin the development of an Iranian crescent? I don't know, but I think we have to think long term, and I think we have to become much more develop the human side of intelligence rather than the technical side of intelligence.
Do you think the president...
So yeah, I think just in those first 2 minutes you can pretty much tell that Dianne Feinstein, even though she said she agreed some with Denis McDonough and some with John McCain, that she's really kind of more on the side of John McCain, which is, as usual, kind of disappointing, especially when it comes to foreign policy and NSA spying. And you know, on some domestic issues, Dianne Feinstein is okay, but on those foreign policy and intelligence, she used to be chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Now she's ranking Democrat since the Republicans have taken over the Senate. And the last clip I want to show about the war on terrorism, or the general war, you know, I showed some on ISIS, some on Yemen. This is the general war on terrorism, or whatever. This is kind of the darker side. I think last week I showed there was a discussion of Guantanamo over on Fox News Sunday. They, of course, only had people against release of Guantanamo inmates, like really hyping the threat, and they were all upset that these 5 inmates from Guantanamo had been released before the Sunday shows last week. And the week before, I had this much better discussion on NBC's Meet the Press, where they had 3 different guests. 2 of them were sort of pro-closing Guantanamo, and then there was one guy from or was it a woman? I can't even remember, from the American Enterprise Institute, who was kind of like what they were saying on Fox News Sunday. You have to keep it open. There's a big threat, and they had, you know, all that stuff. So over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, they also, this is like the 3rd discussion of Guantanamo. They've been doing it like week by week, show by show. I don't know why that is, but here they actually only had 2 people who were in favor of closing Guantanamo, one of whom was a lawyer for one of the detainees who's written a book called Guantanamo Diaries. I've heard about it in the news, about him being supposedly subjected to this involuntary 3-way with 2 American female soldiers who sexually assaulted him somehow and like forced him to engage in this three-way against his will or something like that. But there's also a lot more in there about being tortured and about his, basically humanizing this guy. And I want to show one short clip from his lawyer, Nancy Hollander, talking about the fact that the guy was never really a threat. That's what's so sad, that and he's never been charged with anything. This is really the darker side of the so-called war on terrorism over in this clip.
And Ms. Hollander, under questioning, Mr. Salahi had in the past said he was a member of Al-Qaeda. What kind of evidence can you present in this new hearing that might get him freed? And are you convinced personally that he's no longer a threat?
I'm convinced that he was never a threat. He's innocent. He was never charged with a crime all the time he's been there. And at the time that he joined Al-Qaeda, that's not the same Al-Qaeda that came to the United States. This was in 1990, when the Afghanis were fighting against the Soviets with full support from the United States. So that's where we are, and that's all they have against him. There is no reason to think he was ever a threat, and he should absolutely be.
Even though he was in many of the same places as those who were tied to the bombings.
Well, he's basically being accused of some long ago associations, and that's really all there is.
So what happens next? You talked.
So my thoughts on Guantanamo, I think I made them clear over the last couple weeks when it came up on Fox News Sunday, also on Meet the Press, that there's no due process there, that you can't hold people without charges. And even the 10 people who are going through these military tribunals, they don't really have full due process rights. But there are those 10 people, but it turns out there are 54 or 55 of the 120 or so inmates who have already been cleared for release. Most of them are from Yemen, unfortunately, so they have to be taken by other countries other than Yemen, because Yemen's too unstable. And anyway, it's just an awful chapter in American history that we held people without charges for so many years, and in order to be released, they have to prove their innocence and prove their lack of threat, rather than the other way around, or at least being prisoners of war, where they'd be released when the war is over. I mean, we just ended combat operations in Afghanistan, right? But anyway, that's the last clip I want to show on the general so-called war on terrorism. I want to show a few quick clips on controversy over this movie, American Sniper. I don't really feel that qualified to talk about it because I haven't seen the movie. Hopefully I'll get to see the movie sometime soon, but I have seen a lot of coverage of the controversy as to whether the American sniper portrayed in the movie, whether he's a hero or whether he is symptomatic of the wrongness of American policy in Iraq. And there was actually a tweet from Michael Moore that this will show up later in a discussion over on CNN State of the Union. But here's a screen capture from CNN State of the Union. From Michael Moore tweeted, "My uncle killed by sniper in World War II. We were taught snipers were cowards. We'll shoot you in the back. Snipers aren't heroes and invaders are worse." And I actually, when I heard about this controversy, I kind of flashed back to the movie Inglourious Bastards, which I heard Seth Rogen had tweeted or in some way commented on, where this movie American Sniper kind of is reminiscent of the propaganda movie the Nazis make at the last third of the movie Inglourious Bastards, about that sniper in the clock tower who kills all these Allied soldiers and is a big hero. And it's kind of weird that we have our own version of that. But like I said, I haven't seen the movie, and apparently, according to a lot of people, it does show it's not really a pro-war movie. It shows the costs of war and the costs on the family, and it's kind of a more balanced approach, or I don't know. But then I've also heard some negative things about this guy Chris Kyle, the American Sniper, especially in terms of his lawsuit with Jesse Ventura. From what I understand, Jesse Ventura is winning that lawsuit that Chris Kyle said some defamatory things about Jesse Ventura, and I don't really know all the facts of that. But First, I want to show some quotes from Chris Kyle that Bill Maher talked about over on HBO's Real Time, where I guess at least he did call the American sniper Chris Kyle a patriot, but I think he called him, a psychopathic patriot or something like that over in this clip.
Deflate-gate, which is American Sniper. It made $105 million over the box office. This is unheard of in January. That's what superheroes usually make, superhero movies make. I'm not surprised. Clint Eastwood's a great filmmaker. But somehow the Twitter war broke out, and now we have to take sides, whether the American Sniper is a real hero or not. Now, I said last week we had Catherine Bigelow on, who had made Hurt Locker. And I said it kind of goes over a lot of the same territory. Hurt Locker made $17 million because it was a little ambiguous and thoughtful. And this one is just American hero. He's a psychopath patriot, and we love him. You know, I read some of the quotes from the real Chris Kyle. He said, "I hate the damn savages," talking about the Iraqis, "and I've been fighting and I always will. I love killing bad guys. Even with the pain, I loved what I was doing. Maybe war isn't really fun, but I certainly was enjoying it." I don't know. Eisenhower once said, "I hate war as only a soldier who has lived it can." I just don't see this guy in the same league as Eisenhower. I'm sorry. And if you're a Christian, I know this is a Christian country, I hate the damn savages. I don't give a fuck what happens. That doesn't seem like a Christian thing to say.
You know, it's a very interesting point. There's a lot of anger in this country, and the people who go see this movie are people who are very angry. And this guy basically says, "I'm going to fight on your side," and they bite for it. I think there's some. I bet you if you looked at a cross section of the Tea Party and people who go to see this movie, there's a lot of intersection.
So that's kind of the more left-wing take, I guess, or more the left wing of the Democratic Party, I guess, or some people call it the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, with Howard Dean being one of the more progressive voices in the Democratic Party. And Bill Maher, I don't even know, I guess he did give all that money to Barack Obama's campaign, so he is a Democrat in that sense, but he's also kind of more to the left, except on a few things. But over on CNN State of the Union, it was kind of interesting. They had on two members of Congress. Ruben Gallego is actually a Democrat, and then Adam Kinzinger is the Republican, but they're both Iraq War vets, and they were bipartisan in their praise of snipers and praise of the American sniper, this guy Chris Kyle. And first I'm going to show where Michael Smerconish brings up the controversy, and Adam Kinzinger kind of brings it into the whole Michael Moore thing about them being cowards, the Michael Moore tweet. But we don't quite get to that tweet yet. But here's the first clip from CNN State of the Union, Michael Smerconish and Adam Kinzinger in this clip.
Congressman Kinzinger, this movie has also sparked a conversation about the role of snipers. How do non-snipers in the military regard their brethren who are snipers? How do they view that role?
They're amazing. You know, for years I've worn the name of Christopher Horton, who was killed in Pakistan, Afghanistan, was a sniper. I've worn his name. They're fantastic people. I mean, keep in mind, so everybody that says, you know, when you hear somebody say that snipers are cowards, they're hiding behind. Well, here's one that wasn't. Here's one that was killed. They all are brave men and women that have done a lot of hard work. So, look, they're the overlords. They're the folks protecting us. They're the folks that are protecting the guys on the ground from threats they don't see. It's essential. And for anybody that would attack a man or a woman in the military for the job they do, I mean, you see it in the movie, you know, where Chris has to do some things and he's not celebrating it. It obviously bothers him and it really gets to him. But he knows that he has to do that to save the lives of his brothers and sisters.
You're making.
So that's, like I said, kind of expected. The Republican, Adam Kinzinger, and Iraq war vet taking the side of the American sniper and against Michael Moore. He kind of brought up Michael Moore. And then in the continuation of that clip, Michael Smerconish actually brings up the Michael Moore tweet and takes over to the Democrat, Ruben Gallego, who, like I said, is in bipartisan agreement in favor of snipers and calling them heroes. And then it gets back to, in the same clip I'm about to show, Representative Adam Kinzinger really gets negative on Michael Moore. And unlike, I said I wouldn't talk about American Sniper because I haven't seen it, he talks about one of Michael Moore's movies really negatively, and then says he wouldn't see it. So apparently, I guess he hasn't seen it. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip over here.
Of his brothers and sisters.
You're making reference, obviously, to Michael Moore, who sent an email to State of the Union. And to be fair to him, in part, the email said, I said nothing of the film and certainly nothing about Chris Kyle in the message that I sent out. He also says this: there are only 2 movies about the Iraq War that have grossed over $100 million, mine and Clint's. Now, that would be an interesting discussion to have. Want to add anything to the discussion on snipers?
Yes, snipers are a totally different breed of man. I got to serve with a lot of snipers, and we unfortunately lost a lot of snipers. And I got to pull security for them once in a while, and they're just warriors. They're great warriors, and they're just a totally different breed of military person. And I think people that are in the infantry combat arms will understand that. They're awesome. They're great to have, but they're entirely different from the door kickers like myself and a bunch of other guys. But they're great to have in combat with you.
Can I say something real quick?
Please.
Michael Moore.
Yeah.
Your movie is no comparison to American Sniper. I would never see Michael Moore's movie. An American Sniper talks about American heroism and heroes, and we all know his tweet was referring to this movie. Even if he says I didn't have the name in there, maybe it was just randomly something else. We're not that stupid.
Can I share with you? First of all, I want to say this, Chris Kyle.
So yeah, I guess Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger isn't a Michael Moore fan. That is pretty clear from that last clip. And that's the last clip I want to show on the controversy about the movie American Sniper. I think it kind of fits in with the whole Islam and war on terrorism so-called issue. So the next several clips, I think it's 4 clips I want to show, is on this controversy that erupted in the last few days about Prime Minister of Israel Benjamin Netanyahu was invited by the Republican Congress to come speak to Congress a couple weeks before the Israeli election, and they never consulted the Obama administration, the executive branch, or the president, who usually is supposed to be the one who conducts foreign policy and talks to other foreign leaders. And it's kind of unprecedented that the Congress would have a foreign leader come and speak without in some way consulting with the president, who's supposed to be the head of our foreign policy. And so that was a controversy that was addressed on several of the shows. It was first, I'm actually going to show the way it was addressed last night on Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live. This is a joke from one of the co-anchors of Weekend Update, Colin Jost, over in this clip.
Insiders are saying that the Obama administration is extremely upset that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu plans to ask Congress for additional sanctions against Iran, saying that he will, quote, pay a price, which brings the number of countries that have threatened Israel up to an even all of them.
I guess that was kind of funny, but that was not the last time that NBC, that was Saturday Night Live on NBC, so it wasn't the last time that NBC brought up the pay a price comment. It also came up on NBC's Meet the Press this morning when Chuck Todd had his interview with Denis McDonough, White House Chief of Staff, and here's how Denis McDonough responded, not to the Saturday Night Live clip, but to the, there's actually the spit in the face part of this quote you'll see, and then also a part say this is an unnamed administration official saying that this was the Israelis spitting in the face of the Obama administration and they would pay a price, which is disavowed by Denis McDonough over in this clip.
I want to switch quickly to the issue of Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to Congress. You guys weren't informed. Here's a senior American official, unnamed, in Haaretz on Friday, is quoted as saying this: "There are things you simply don't do." Speaking of Netanyahu, he spat in our face publicly, and that's no way to behave. Netanyahu ought to remember that President Obama has a year and a half left to his presidency and that there will be a price. What's the price?
I don't know who you're talking about there, and I don't know.
This is nobody in the White House that said this.
I can't guarantee you that. It's not me. It's not the president. It's not what we believe. Here's what we believe.
You don't believe he spat in the president's face?
Here's what we believe, Chuck. We think that as a general matter, we at the United States has stayed out of internal politics in our countries of our closest allies. That's true whether it's Great Britain, where we just recently had a visit from Prime Minister Cameron, full 4 months before their election, or in Israel. So that's why we're going to approach it the way we've approached it.
But you don't feel this is going to damage the relationship?
You know, Chuck, I'm not going to get hyperbolic or emotional about this. Our relationship with Israel is many-faceted, deep, and abiding. It's focused on a shared series of threats, but also on a shared series of values that one particular incident is not going to inform overwhelmingly.
Michael
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Denis McDonough brought up David Cameron, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, who was here last week. I had a clip of him last week. And one of the clips I didn't show last week where they were asking him about how he was calling members of the Senate and telling them not to vote in favor of these conditional Iran sanctions. See, that's the big question. Will the Congress vote for these sanctions that go into effect if Iran doesn't come to a deal by some date on these nuclear talks? And President Obama recently said that that would derail the talks and would show, that would, especially with some of our allies in Europe who are involved in all this, would show that the U.S. wasn't negotiating in good faith and they should wait until after the talks fail, which they may well fail. But so anyway, David Cameron kind of lobbied Congress, so this is sort of the Republicans responding by bringing in the Prime Minister of Israel, who will lobby on the other side, saying that they should put in place sanctions and insist that any treaty or any deal with Iran be treated as a treaty that has to be passed by Congress. And anyway, I want to show another Denis McDonough quote where this is from CNN State of the Union. Like I said, they usually have the most up-to-date broadcast because I think they record last. At least they used to when it was live at 9 a.m. Pacific. And so they have the most recent quote from Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, on this. And then they read the quote to Denis McDonough, it's Michael Smerconish reads the quote to Denis McDonough and then asks whether he blames this whole controversy more on Benjamin Netanyahu or John Boehner, the Speaker of the House who invited the Israeli Prime Minister. And of course he gets a dodged answer from Denis McDonough over in this clip.
Earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and I think I have the quote that we can put on the screen, but he said, "I'll go anywhere I'm invited in order to enunciate the state of Israel's position and in order to defend its future and its existence." Who does the White House blame more? Boehner for extending the invite or Bibi for accepting it?
White House doesn't get into blame games on these kinds of things. Let's take a step back. This is the most important relationship we have in the world. This is something that ought to be and will continue to be, as far as we're concerned, above partisan politics. This is a relationship, given its importance, that stretches across many different things, from values straight through intelligence cooperation to defense and security assistance. That's the kinds of things that we'll be focused on in this regard. That's why we think also we ought not get involved in their politics. That's why the president thinks it doesn't make any sense for us to meet with the prime minister 2 weeks before his election.
Did the president...
So, yeah, like I said, it was kind of a dodge from Denis McDonough, though he mentioned that a good reason that the president doesn't want to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu is because it's a couple weeks before he's up for election, and it would be kind of meddling. And also, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is kind of getting involved in American partisan politics, although, like I said, David Cameron kind of did it last week. But the last clip I want to show on this is the Democratic member of Congress, Adam Schiff, being a lot more forthright on this being a bad idea than Denis McDonough was, basically saying it's meddling and a bad, anyway, you'll see what he says over in this clip.
Yes, we should, but I agree completely with the governor. I think this was a terrible mistake by the speaker. It used to be at least the goal that politics ended at the water's edge. Now it only begins there. And I think for us to extend an invitation 2 weeks before the Israeli election gives Israelis the impression we're trying to meddle in their politics. And I also find it extraordinary that a world leader would be invited before the Congress effectively to lobby in favor of a bill that the president opposes. I just think it's harmful to the U.S.-Israel relationship, and I think it was a very ill-considered decision by the Speaker.
In your capacity.
So I don't know what's going to come of that, and I mean, apparently no one's going to disinvite Benjamin Netanyahu, so it could be like this big point of friction between Israel and the United States at a time right before the election may kind of backfire on Benjamin Netanyahu, because apparently over in the Israeli elections, it's a negative for him from some of the things I've read, that he has this bad relationship with the United States that's actually a political negative for him in his country's elections. So if this conflict continues, it could mean no more Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and I'm not a big Bibi fan, so that might be nice. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I have about 8 clips left, and they're all on the Republicans who are running for president in 2016, or some of them who are just pretending to run. I'll get to that in a minute. There was this big conclave this last week in Iowa. I think it was called the Freedom Summit, and it's put on by Representative Steve King, who is one of the most anti-immigrant of the Republicans in the House of Representatives, and that comes up in some of these clips. The first one I want to show you is from This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They have a report from Jonathan Karl talking about the Freedom Summit. There's Chris Christie's in this one, Scott Walker, Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, but it's sort of a general look at what happened in Iowa over in this.
And they're off. In Iowa this weekend, the unofficial start of the race for the Republican presidential nomination. And it is wide open.
This is the most open Republican nomination since 1940. I think it'll be fun, it'll be interesting to watch.
Open and crowded. At least 12 speakers here at the Iowa Freedom Summit say they are at least thinking about running. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
You are the only person you agree with 100% of the time.
A trash-talking, sometimes moderate Republican from the Northeast might have a tough time out here in the conservative heartland. But when we caught up with him exclusively outside this secret backstage exit, he suggested Iowa could be Christie country.
Can somebody like you really compete in Iowa?
Sure, why not?
Another blue state governor, Wisconsin's Scott Walker, was one of the summit's biggest stars.
If you're not afraid to go big and go bold, you can actually get results.
We met up with him moments after he got off stage. He made it clear to us he's getting ready to run.
That sounded like a presidential campaign speech, or at least the beginning of one.
Well, we've been tested in Wisconsin, there's no doubt about that, and we're looking for good leadership, and we'll see what the future holds.
Wow! But judging from the raucous reception here for Texas Senator Ted Cruz,
God bless the great state of Iowa.
Iowa's social conservatives might have found their candidate.
If you say you'll stand up to the Washington establishment, the career politicians of both parties that have gotten us in this mess, show me where you've stood up and fought.
How much of a mistake would it be to nominate another establishment Republican?
Over and over again, when Republicans have nominated candidates in the mold of Gerald Ford or Bob Dole or John McCain or Mitt Romney, all of whom are good, honorable, decent men, but every one of them lost.
Mitt Romney was not here, and neither were some other big GOP stars like Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, Bobby Jindal, and Marco Rubio. It's probably a good thing Romney and Bush missed Donald Trump's speech.
You can't have Bush. The last thing we need is another Bush.
Yes, Trump is thinking of running again. And some of the day's biggest applause lines came when he hit Bush and Romney.
And I think Romney had his chance. He should have won. He choked.
Another target, Hillary Clinton.
Like Hillary Clinton, I too have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles around the globe. But unlike her, I've actually accomplished something.
One of the newcomers here, Carly Fiorina, former CEO of Hewlett-Packard.
Women are 53% of voters. We're half the nation. So it's important that women are in our party.
Then there's 2012 Iowa winner Rick Santorum. He doesn't need a Hawkeye State introduction, just a way to separate himself among what could be the biggest Iowa field ever.
How many Republican candidates can you fit on a debate stage?
Well, I guess that would depend on how big the stage is.
And John Carl.
So yeah, there was Rick Santorum at the end, and I'm actually going to show another clip of Rick Santorum, actually an interview from this morning on CNN's State of the Union, an interview with Michael Smerconish. I'm going to show a few of the possible 2016 candidates who were interviewed this morning. Bobby Jindal is another one, and John Kasich, the governors of Louisiana and Ohio, respectively, there. But first, I want to show another general report on the Freedom Summit in Iowa, and this is sort of from the conservative point of view, but this is one of the times Fox News is actually useful in their reporting, because they're talking about Republicans and the Republican primaries, and if there's one thing that Fox News is useful for reporting on, it's like what's going on in the right wing, or what's going on with conservatives and Republicans, because that's where they live, obviously, that they are sort of the communications wing of the Republican Party. And here's how Carl Cameron on Fox News Sunday covered the same thing you basically just saw from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos and Jonathan Karl. This is Carl Cameron on Fox News Sunday here.
Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker tried to position himself to the right of potential 2016 rivals with a list of accomplishments that drew enthusiastic applause.
We passed pro-life legislation, and we've defunded Planned Parenthood. We've lowered taxes on employers, on individuals, on property. Our property taxes are lower today in Wisconsin than they were 4 years ago. How many governors can say that?
That was seen by many as a shot at, among others, Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey, which has some of the nation's highest taxes. When hecklers interrupted the sometimes abrasive governor, he seemed to take the bait.
Don't they know I am from New Jersey?
But Christie's been invited to campaign on behalf of fellow Republicans in Iowa for years and turned the tables.
If I was too blunt, too direct, too loud, and too New Jersey for Iowa, then why do you people keep inviting me back?
Protesters also disrupted former Texas Governor Rick Perry as he blasted the Obama administration for failing to secure the Texas-Mexico border. Frontrunners in the polls, Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush, did not attend. But Donald Trump did, and rallied Iowa's GOP right against both as damaged goods.
So you can't have Romney, he choked. You can't have Bush.
The potential caucus candidates were here to make new friends.
So that was Carl Cameron there at the end, and he ended with Donald Trump and kind of pretended he might be running for president. And on that topic, I thought there was a really funny discussion between Michael Smerconish and their reporter, I think his name is Peter Hamby, and they showed like a quick montage of some of the candidates at the Iowa summit, and then talked about how some of the people are actually just pretending to run for president. This is from CNN State of the Union this morning in this clip.
It's great to be back in the great state of Iowa.
I've read a lot of stuff before I came out here to the summit, and I've heard don't they know I am from New Jersey?
God bless the great state of Iowa.
I always feel so welcome when I come to Iowa.
Like Hillary Clinton, I too have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles. But unlike her, I've actually accomplished something.
It's great to be back in Iowa, where, believe it or not, the sweater vest was born.
Is Hillary a new Democrat or an old one?
I am seriously thinking of running for president.
Those are some of the 2016 GOP presidential hopefuls who spoke at Saturday's Iowa Freedom Summit. The gathering was also notable for who was not there. Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney, no-shows. But CNN's Peter Hamby was on hand and joins us now from Des Moines. Peter, I want you to know that I, too, like the Donald, am seriously considering running. Does anybody there believe him when he says it?
No, he's not running for president. This is probably the third or fourth time by my count over the years where Donald Trump has floated his name for president. He's always good at getting media attention wherever he goes, but reporters who write that he's serious about this are contributing to the problem and encouraging him. And look, Sarah Palin said similar things over the weekend, that she is interested in running for president. The backstory there, Michael, is that she went into the Marriott Des Moines bar the other night, and a bunch of reporters asked her if she was interested, and she said, sure, why not? And so she wants people to know that she's interested in being interested, so people write stories about how she's interested. But neither of these folks are going to run for president. There were two kinds of candidates at the event tomorrow. There are people who are serious about this, who are hiring staff, raising money, and laying groundwork in Iowa. And there are people who are there for the free media attention.
As some of the people providing the free media attention, I guess that's a pretty candid assessment of some of the candidates. They're not being serious. And on the subject of the Republicans running for Congress, not for president, I also want to show what I think was the most snarky analysis of the whole thing. I normally don't show clips of pundits, so I'm not like a commentator commenting on other commentators, but I couldn't resist showing this clip from Dana Milbank from the Washington Post, a writer who I really enjoy reading, and he talked about both how he's dreaming of a run by Mitt Romney, and then he also referenced Steve King, the host of the Freedom Summit, and some of his anti-immigrant views. I mentioned that earlier, and you can see that here.
Oh, when I saw that Donald Trump might run, I had that feeling. And it is like Sky Malt in the large number, but also the exotic offerings. I mean, you have the equivalent of the suit of armor and the flamingos and the Bigfoot out there right now.
Who's the Bigfoot?
Well, there's a couple of people vying for Bigfoot. I'm not going to make a Chris Christie joke. You're not going to lure me into that. But, you know, this is the Cantaloupe Calves Caucus right now. Do you realize that for the first major event of this election season, the guy's name on the lectern that you just showed, Steve King, this is the guy who said that the Dreamers were these drug mules with calves the size of cantaloupes, likened immigrants to dogs, talked about a woman in the First Lady's box at the State of the Union being deportable. This is why Jeb Bush isn't there. This is why Mitt Romney isn't there. And is this really the way they want to kick off their 2016, by poisoning the well with the most important demographic group in America?
Well,
Yeah, that last part, I forgot to mention that Representative Steve King, who's hosting this thing during just the recent State of the Union, he tweeted about this deportable, undocumented immigrant being with the First Lady and how horrible that was. And yet a lot of these Republican candidates showed up there. And I didn't introduce that clip from Dana Milbank correctly. I said that he was like dreaming of a run by Mitt Romney, but it was actually Donald Trump he was dreaming of a run, as a writer who gets to analyze the race. I guess that's one of his more interesting things he could be writing about. I have now 4 last clips on the Republicans who may be running for president. These are actual candidates who were on the shows. First, I want to show Bobby Jindal, who was over on NBC's Meet the Press, and Chuck Todd asked him kind of about some really not partisan, some sectarian religious things that he said at this prayer rally he was at. He didn't go over to Iowa, but he did go to this prayer rally. Oh wait, excuse me, I said this was on Meet the Press, but actually it's on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos asking him about this prayer rally, and he said something that, this is, if you heard a Muslim say this, especially people who are very concerned about Muslims, he said, "Our God will win." That's not something you want to hear anyone say, right? Over in this clip.
Yesterday. Instead, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal headlined a massive prayer rally called The Response in Baton Rouge.
We can't just elect a candidate and fix what ails our country. We can't just pass a law and fix what ails our country. We need a spiritual revival to fix what ails our country. It is like God has given us the book of life. He doesn't let us see the pages for today and tomorrow. He doesn't promise us everything will go the way you want. But he does let you see the last page in the book of life. And on the last page, our God wins.
And Governor Jindal joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Governor Jindal. Let me begin with that rally yesterday. I know you said it was a religious event, not a political event, but is it the job of a president to lead a spiritual revival? And I was struck by that final line, "Our God wins." How do you think that lands in a country of 320 million people of many different kinds of spirituality, many different kinds of faith, many who believe in no God at all?
George, first of all, thank you for having me. You know, it is a time-honored tradition going back to our nation's founding for our presidents, for our leaders to turn to God for guidance, for wisdom,
George Washington did it. Abraham Lincoln did it. Harry Truman did it. So absolutely, I think this idea of praying to God for wisdom and guidance is as old as our country. Secondly, look, I think we are a diverse country. Obviously, a majority of our people are Christians, but we don't discriminate against anybody. And that's one of the great things about America. We believe in religious liberty. Yesterday was an amazing, amazing event. Thousands of people came together to worship and pray across racial lines, across political lines. I thought it was a great, great event. And I hope you'll see more of these across the country.
I'm sure we will. You missed that.
So there you can see he's kind of like backpedaling to make it sound like he's not discriminating against anyone, but he's still trying to send signals to the Christian base of the Republican Party that, you know, he's, you know, one of them. And speaking of that, Mike Huckabee, he's the one who's over talking to Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, and Chuck Todd asked him about something he... Wait, I do have that right here. Chuck Todd talked to Mike Huckabee and asked him about something he said about maybe not obeying courts on marriage equality rulings, and he kind of did kind of the same thing. I think he's trying to find a way to say things that signal to the Republican base that he's not for same-sex marriage, while being able to sort of deny it when he gets to the general election, like that's ever really going to happen. But you can see that here.
Marriage. I have Hugh Hewitt on my panel today. You did an interview with him earlier this week. I'm going to play an exchange with him that you had on same-sex marriage. Here it is.
This idea that a judge makes a ruling on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning same-sex marriage licenses are being given out, that's utter nonsense.
Would you counsel civil disobedience to county clerks?
Well, the point is, states would be in a position that their legislatures would have to go into session. They would have to create legislation that the governor would sign. If they don't, then there is not same-sex marriage in that state.
I just want to clarify. Are you advocating essentially nullification here by the states if the Supreme Court legalizes same-sex marriage?
I'm advocating an adherence to the Constitution. I'm really saying that there is a process to change the law, and it doesn't just involve one unilateral branch of government. Gosh, Chuck, when I was governor, I wish unilaterally I could have done some things as governor. With 90% Democrats in the legislature, it would have been much easier sledding for me if I could have just acted. And I'm sure the courts would like to act all by themselves. And I guarantee the legislature would like to act by themselves. But that's why the founders created this very cumbersome, tedious, sometimes disgustingly slow process of changing the law. The courts can't make a law. They can interpret one, they can invalidate one, but even then, as in the case of...
I'm not even going to show that whole clip, but that's not true. Courts can make law. It's called case law. And if a court, you know, on Friday says that states can't discriminate on the basis of gender or sexual orientation or whatever when they issue marriage licenses, then that means on Saturday, if they happen to be open, they have to give out marriage licenses equally to opposite sex and same-sex couples. So I think that wasn't really making a lot of sense. But I want to show now another clip of a Republican who's trying to kind of have it both ways. This is Rick Santorum talking over on CNN State of the Union to Mike Smirkanish about climate change, and he's also trying to come up with this sort of like specious argument that he can split the difference and make the signal to the Republican base that he's not going to do anything about climate change, but still have some deniability if he gets to the general election over in this clip.
The Senate voted this week 98-1 that climate change is not a hoax. If Rick Santorum were still in the Senate, would you have supported that?
Is the climate warming? Clearly, over the past 15 or 20 years, the answer is yes. The question is man having a significant impact on that, number one? And number two, and this is even more important than the first, is there really anything we can do about it? And the answer is there anything the United States can do about it? Clearly no. Even folks who accept all of the science by the alarmists on the other side recognize that everything that's being considered by the United States will have will have zero impact on it, given what's going on in the rest of the world.
So is your answer do nothing?
Again, well, the answer is it do something if it has no impact. Of course do nothing. Why would you do something for the and with people admitting that even if you do something, it won't make a difference.
Senator, thank you for.
So yeah, that is kind of a specious argument. Just because if America can't do anything by itself that will have impact, America should do nothing. I don't even know if that's true, because it will have some kind of impact. But also, if America can do something and lead other countries, and that will have an impact, that's why that's kind of a specious argument. And then the last clip I want to show is actually kind of a better outreach argument from the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, trying to talk about how his economic growth is actually going to reach out to people who Republicans usually don't seem to care about. So this might actually be a message on tax cuts and economic growth that would reach out to the base of the Republican Party in a primary, and then he can sort of turn it around for the general election a little better over in this clip.
Let me point out, and some conservatives have hit you on this, what you said in your second inaugural address a couple of weeks ago. Here it is.
Economic growth is not an end unto itself. Economic growth provides the means whereby we can reach out and help those who live in the shadows.
Governor, you accepted federal money to expand under Obamacare. You accepted federal money under Obamacare to expand Medicaid. You are calling for new taxes on cigarettes and natural gas drilling. You quote Matthew 25 about feeding the hungry. Some people say you're too close to Barack Obama.
Well, Chris, listen, we're running $1.5 billion surplus in the state. We're structurally balanced when 20 other states are not able to do that. We are up almost 300,000 jobs. And, we are structurally balanced. I mean, I've always been fiscally responsible. But let me just speak to that issue of helping other people when economic growth provides you an opportunity. I will not turn my back on the mentally ill who live under bridges too often of the time in this country. I will not turn my back on the drug addicted, and I won't turn my back on the working poor. I'm a believer that as a conservative that everybody has a God-given purpose, and it is our job on a temporary basis to try to give them a chance to fulfill their God-given purpose by helping them. Now, it can't be a way of life. It can only be a situation where you help them for a short period of time. And we demand, and are going to demand in our new budget, personal responsibility, that they begin to get training, that we include the business community, and we get people from welfare to work and to more progress. But at the same time, tax reform is an order of the day. What we need to do is to make sure we are able to provide strength for those that want to invest and risk take. And that's exactly what our tax plan is going to be. It's going to help small businesses. We have made significant progress in helping small business, but the proof's in the pudding. We're balanced. We're running surpluses. We have the lowest unemployment in 14 years. Chris, it's all working, and in Ohio, everybody feels included. And finally, in our state of Ohio, which is a microcosm of the country, I won 86 out of 88 counties and 64% of the vote, and I won a county that Barack Obama won by 40 points. The fact is, what Americans want is they want everybody to share an opportunity, everybody to be hopeful, and that's what we do in our state. And it's something...
Huh. I thought that actually sounded pretty good, at least for a Republican. There's a lot of saying good stuff about people who Republicans don't usually care about. And I love the way talking about feeding the poor makes you too far left on Fox News, and even quoting from Christian... one of the humanistic parts of the Christian Bible that I talked about before. But let me know what you think down in the comment section. I really got to go. This shows what, almost like an hour and 50 minutes. I'm way over time. I appreciate those of you who watched along with me as a live show. I've been reading your comments. I featured a couple during the show. And if you want to support my videos through 2016 and the next presidential election, you can support my videos on Patreon. I have a link down in the video description for that, or over on my YouTube channel. There's a place, if you live in a few countries, you can support me directly without a subscription, and I'll be seeing you all next Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and reading your comments between now and then, and I guess I'll just be seeing you all around the internet.